Hello everyone. What you're about to watch is a little bit of a different video from me. It is a compilation of all of my major build guide videos for Unicorn Overlord, for the beginning, middle, and end game, as well as a guide talking about how to not build some squads. I wanted to put this all together in one place for anyone who's interested in getting a comprehensive bird's eye view of the various phases of unit construction in the game as you progress through the game and unlock more classes, unit sizes, etc. If you enjoy this type of thing, please do let me know in the comments down below. And if you'd like to see other compilations, whether they be of gameplay or guides from any of my past content, let me know what you'd like to see so I can put that together for you. That said, I'm gonna let past me take it away. I hope that you all enjoy. This has been edited down to take out some like dead air, intro, outro things, just things like that. Try and make it a little bit of a smoother experience. So I hope you enjoy. I'll see you on the other side. There has been an insane amount of clamor ever since the demo for Unicorn Overlord dropped about the just endless possibilities when it comes to individual builds for characters and soldiers, and then putting those characters and soldiers together into just insane slaying machine units. And I wanted to get in and show a few of the builds that actually worked out the best for me in my time with the demo. I've done 2 complete runs thus far, and I'm working on a 3rd, and I wanted to show off 3 builds today that I'm particularly fond of. The goal is to give you all an idea of what you can start to achieve with a little bit of thought and a couple of interesting items. I want to give you all some inspiration to make your own big units, squads, and have your own fun with the game in the way that you're going to. I want to highlight what you can do, not necessarily what you should do. Although we will do some build videos down the line and where I show you some really kick-ass stuff when we have the opportunity. The other thing that I want to emphasize is when building a unit, the best thing you can do for yourself, especially early in the game when you don't have very large squads, 2, 3, maybe 4 units, is to pick a particular unit type or strategy to build around. And that's what you're going to be seeing in the 3 builds that we talk about today. We've got one soldier that's supposed to do a particular type of thing, and then the rest of the soldiers in the unit are supporting, emphasizing, or even completely facilitating that thing. You'll see what I'm talking about as we go through them here, and we're going to start with what I call the Gyaru Griffin squad, led by Francois, whose name I know I don't pronounce right. I'm trying. It's just hard to learn pronunciation from chat as chat's flying by, and also I can't hear how it's said. I just have to interpret it. So, Gyaru Griffin, what is the goal here? The goal is to maximize on the interesting and unique combat capabilities of Griffin Knights to try and clear large swaths of enemy units as quickly as possible while keeping your Griffin Knight alive. To do that, let's look at Francois herself, because of course she is the focus here. We have a very basic recruit's hand axe on her, partially because I just didn't get my hands on a better axe for her, and partially because she just doesn't really need something better at the moment with the way her support is set up, which we'll talk about in a moment. Gives her some extra HP, gives her some extra XP as you're grinding through the campaign. Nothing wrong with that. Anything better that you can give her will be perfectly fine. The main idea, though, is you want to make use of the Griffin Knight's natural high swing ability. So an axe that is good, but part of its kit is it gives you a different ability. Not necessarily what you want to go for, unless you find something that can be situationally synergistic with the build. But for this early idea, not necessary. We then have a lucky coin, increasing our critical rate by 20% and our evasion by 20. The goal of this build is to have your Griffin Knight hit as hard as possible. Some extra crit rate to make sure that that happens is great. And also, she is the primary dodge tank. She's the primary tank of the build in general. She's in the front line, and things are going to be targeting her the most. So having even more evasion on top of the Knights of good base evasion, especially against melee units, very solid. Finally, we have the Vitality Talisman, just to give us a little bit of extra HP for this attacks that do sneak through, hit decently hard because Griffin Knights do not have the best physical defense in particular, and give her a little bit more of an opportunity to survive and heal up with Wing Rest, her ability that gives her her own healing. We'll talk about that in a moment. As far as our abilities are concerned, we're using High Swing with 2 variations of it, and the reason we have 2 variations of it and why you'll see variations of the same skill across all of these builds is to fulfill certain conditions. Because basically, the character will look at the top left, say, okay, High Swing, priority number 1, row with most combatants, cool. If for some reason there's not a row with the most combatants, maybe there's one in the front and one in the back, and that's it, then we can go to High Swing 2, target the lowest HP, execute something. Lowest HP is always a very solid baseline to have as a condition for any given attack ability, just so you can try and make sure that units don't sneak away with 1 HP, and you can actually finish off squads a little bit more efficiently and preserve your stamina. Finally, we do have Wing Rest to restore our own HP, recover 25% HP, doubled if afflicted. This is great because there's no healing in this squad other than some potential self-healing, and you would like your tank to be able to provide some of her own healing. The nice thing about High Swing is you're just going to be able to cleave through a row of enemies whenever and wherever you want. Cavalry targets can't guard against it, they take extra damage, but just as an axe unit, you're hitting pretty damn hard. So all but the most resilient of targets are going to take a lot of damage from this attack, and if you can hit up to 3 things at once, that's awesome. Now, of course, you might be saying, well, yeah, but what about resilient targets like hoplites and things like that? What are we supposed to do about those? Well, that's where our support comes in, with Witch Yana. Yana is set up with an interesting little array of abilities. First off, she has the Chiropteran Staff that she joins with. Gives +5 to evasion and +3 to initiative. No other special abilities, but that's fine. She doesn't need them. Primarily, I like this staff on her because of the initiative that it grants, which allows her to start setting up the attacks for the rest of the squad. Then she has a Leather Hood to increase her magical attack. Nothing wrong with that. She's going to be hitting things with Ice Bolt. Does magical damage. More damage is good. The most important piece of this set of gear is the Dove Plume, which gives another initiative +10. We want this because we want to be able to Ice Bolt a dangerous target right off the bat to make things a little bit safer for our Griffin Knight. Again, she's a dodge tank, not a traditional tank, so if an attack does manage to get through and hit her, it could be pretty bad pretty fast. With Ice Bolt, we can try to make sure that that doesn't happen. Let's talk about our tactics for it. Our first iteration of 3 prioritizes the back row and the unit with the most AP in the back row. The idea here being you can find something that is either hasn't attacked yet, potentially going to try to attack, or, God forbid, has multiple AP, and freeze it so that it can't get any attacks off before you're able to potentially cleave it in half with your Griffin Knight. Failing any units in the back row or a unit with the most AP will default to targeting an armored unit because we'll deal good damage to them, freeze them, prevent them from guarding, never a bad thing. And then if all else fails, we can try to execute an enemy with a lowest HP Ice Bolt. Now, the most important part, and the reason that this whole build kind of ticks, is the Magic Conferral skill that makes witches very, very strong. This activates before an ally's physical attack. It adds magic damage to an ally's next attack of 50 potency, and we have it set to prioritize our flying unit. The idea here is we can add magic damage to our attack, and suddenly those enemies with high physical defense, like fighters, hoplites, other targets, suddenly not so resilient against our gigantic axe-swinging lunatic. With this, you can easily have a high swing, cleave through all 3 units, and finish them off. And with the added benefit of the fact that high swing is considered a ranged attack, so it can target the front row or the back row. Take out a bunch of soldiers that are trying to chain heal at the end of fights, easy. Take out a backline knight that's hard to hit but is going to be guarding the front line to make it even harder to get to the knight and make things hard to take down, easy. This does a remarkable amount of damage, even just with the regular recruit's hand axe, and it is the #1 reason why this build ticks. Now, of course, we do need some extra defense, as no matter how high your evasion is, if an enemy can get a guaranteed hit on you, like a ranger, your Griffin Knight will pop real fast. That's where our fighter comes in. Fighters are an interesting class, and we're going to be talking about them in general when I start doing my actual unit breakdown guides and talking about what's good, what's not, how to build them, all that type of fun stuff. But fighters are getting talked about a lot as generally being one of the weaker classes in the game. However, I think that what people are missing is that they're very versatile. They're a great body to put good equipment on because their natural skill set is not the most useful but has some situational use. They're a very good option to be able to put something like, say, the Viper Fang sword on to give them a useful new attack that you might not otherwise want to use on something like a thief, who you generally want to be using their PP steel attack. So, what is Renee set up to do here? Well, as mentioned, he has the Viper Fang. I like this as it allows your squad to have a lot more damage output than it otherwise might from this kind of defensive, tanky fighter unit by poisoning big enemies and making them tick down with a lot of damage whenever they try to use their next ability. It does the same amount of damage as the fighter's Warding Slash, and unfortunately, Renee is not going to be moving before a lot of other units because fighters are fairly slow. So trying to get a hit in with Warding Slash to boost your defense when there's not many enemies that are going to be throwing attacks around at that point anyway, not the most useful thing. With this, we can actually do something a lot more interesting. Then he has a basic bronze shield. It's really all he needs. I would, of course, upgrade this, but at this early point in the demo, I didn't really have anything on hand, and it turns out didn't really need it either, which is pretty nice. Finally, we have the Guardian Gloves, a very interesting item that I want to figure out better use of, but essentially what they do is they give you plus 10% to your guard rate, not bad at all, some extra physical defense, I'll take it, but most importantly, the guarding fighter's skill. It activates after guarding an attack, and it grants the user plus 20% physical attack and plus 30% critical damage. So, in situations where things are hitting your backline, Renee, your fighter, or whatever fighter you happen to be using, blocks the attack, because they're slow, now they've got to boost their physical attack and their critical damage. They come out swinging with that Viper Fang, hit real hard, lay some poison on someone, and really make them think about what it was they're doing with their lives. As far as our tactics setup, we have the following. 2 iterations of Poison Slash. The first one prioritizing armored units, so that way if, maybe your magical attack doesn't quite bring them down or something along those lines, you can hit them with the poison, hopefully finish them off that way, even if the initial attack maybe doesn't do as much damage because they're high physical defense. And then failing there to be any armored units, we have a second iteration of Poison Slash that just targets the lowest HP enemy. Again, try and finish them off either with the poison or the attack itself. Sorry for the quick cut. I had to actually switch the arrangement of Arrow Cover and Guarding Fighter. I forgot where this save was at the point in the demo that I loaded it from. The tactic wasn't actually saved from how I'd been using it during the course of the game, so I had to swap these around. Arrow Cover is our #1 priority. We're prioritizing flying because, again, the whole reason we have a fighter here is to jump in the way of an arrow shot that might otherwise one-shot our Griffin Knight, who we need to make sure stays alive. This is the #1 priority. If there is an archer on the field, I want this to be happening. Now, that said, if there's not an archer on the field, that's where Guarding Fighter can come in. Situationally, Renee blocks an attack, reduces the damage that he takes, buffs his own damage, comes in swinging for the counter hit. Great. Never hurts to have some extra damage, and there's going to be weird unit formations where you can't just wipe things out with a big cleave of your axe. You're going to need better single target damage to blow up priority targets, enemies that might otherwise not get hit. That's where Guarding Fighter can come in and help you do just that. I love this squad. It's one of my most effective squads by far in the course of my time with the PS5 demo. I can just clear enemy units like no tomorrow. And you don't take that much damage if you wind up taking out 50%, 75% of the enemy squad with your first attack, right? Now, we're not the fastest. There are times where we will get out initiatived, but that's where Yana can come in to try and neutralize enemies that are going to be doing that. As a matter of fact, now that I think about it, I actually kind of want to add a different condition. Rather than prioritizing the enemy with the most AP, it could actually be good. This will require experimentation, but it could be good to target an enemy with the highest initiative instead, because she should be able to outspeed most things, and then we can neutralize a target that might otherwise get some dangerous attacks off on our Griffin Knight or our fighter. Something to play around with. This is where the tactics system can get really interesting really fast, because that one change could dramatically impact the way that a battle unfolds, but something to play with. But that's the idea here. Neutralize a fast, dangerous enemy, get your Griffin Knight buffed, have your fighter on standby to tank any attacks that she might take from arrows, have her fly in, swing hard, crush a bunch of dudes, and then Yana and Renee maybe can finish some things off depending on the way the battle proceeded. Love it. Very effective, and I can't wait to see when I absolutely use this build in the full campaign what other optimizations I can make with some better gear. Next up, we have Berenice's squad with one of the most glass cannon assault builds that I've put together in this game thus far, and something that I thought was going to be an absolute meme and quickly turned into one of my favorite builds that I've done. The idea here is that Berenice the Sellsword can deal a lot of damage very quickly due to her high damage heavy slash, as well as the fact that she can use attacks like following slash to hit enemies that then attack us. The follow-up, once she's cleared out a lot of damage on the enemy, will be her powerful call, granting a 30% physical attack boost to one of our cavaliers, one of our knights here, who will then charge in and start cleaning up enemies that have the lowest HP and getting their attack back to keep doing it over and over until hopefully the squad is gone, which happens more often than not. So of course, what do we have on Berenice here? We have the Hallowed Blade, which allows her to heal 10% HP when using an active skill and gives her +5 max HP. This is great because she really, more than any of the other members of the squad, needs to survive to set up those future kills or the whole thing falls apart. So having a little bit of extra HP and the ability to heal herself a little bit, since there are no other healers in the squad, is very nice. We then have the Lapis Pendant, giving us a base PP of +1, allowing us to use both of our support abilities, very important. and the Dancer's Bracelet itself, which gives us the Powerful Call ability, which again grants that 30% physical attack increase. As far as our tactics are concerned, we have the normal Sellsword Heavy Slash, big physical damage to set up a weakened enemy, targeting the highest HP enemy to achieve maximum efficiency on that attack. Powerful Call for when one of our knights decides to ride out and deal damage, gives them a nice physical attack boost that might even allow them to finish off a squishier enemy without needing it to be set up first, getting the whole rollover of AP, chaining attacks together thing going. And then a couple iterations of Following Slash. This is a little bit experimental as I'm trying to figure out how often you can actually trigger Following Slash. It seems like it should be fairly often. The first iteration set up to target the highest HP enemy, counterattack a single enemy, and grants the user +1 to PP if the attack hits. The idea then is if you still have PP left from Following Slash, granting it back to you, if another enemy attacks, then you can follow up once again with another Following Slash, targeting the lowest HP enemy to try and execute something. I'm not 100% sure if this works the way that I'm thinking that it works. There might be some unseen conditions where you can only trigger something like this once per unit, but I think it bears experimenting, and it never hurts to have 2 iterations of this in here. Is at the end of the day, the worst thing that happens is if only one's going to activate, only one is going to activate. No big deal, whatever. Looking at our knights, we have Jamel, who is set up with a Templar's Spear, a Bronze Shield, and a Pursuance Bracelet. The Templar's Spear is just a decently damaging spear that gives some extra physical defense and guard rate. Again, a little bit of an extra boost to help keep these gentlemen alive, because if they go down, the whole thing falls apart. But more often than not, they tend to survive with an HP or 2 for a staggeringly long amount of time. The Bronze Shield is a very simple shield that just helps to guard. A better shield here obviously does not hurt, but again, early days of the demo build and basic gear still works. And then more importantly, the Pursuance Bracelet. This grants the ability Pursuit, which, if you're familiar, is the ability that Joseph has that allows him to follow up allies' attacks for nice damage. The goal with this is to be able to sortie out, kill something with an Assaulting Lance, get your AP back, another ally attacks, whether it be Berenice or the other knight, follow up with a Pursuit, execute a weakened enemy, or maybe just weaken them enough that, again, another Assaulting Lance from Jamel or the other knight will be able to chain into another follow-up attack and keep bouncing back and forth to clear out the entire enemy squad. This extra little bit of damage utilizing your PP really makes it so much more likely that you're going to be able to get that loop going, that it's not uncommon for this squad to one round a total HP enemy unit of like 180 HP. It's pretty nuts. We then do have Quick Guard there if we wind up taking an early hit, just need to block. So it goes. I'd rather make sure that these guys stay alive to keep attempting to chain their attacks together than to necessarily get the guaranteed Pursuit in. So it's here if we happen to get attacked and need to reduce the damage. Swinging over here to Hughes, has a simpler setup, but not by much. Also has the Templar's Spear and the Bronze Shield for the exact same reasons that his brother-in-arms does, but this time has the Silken Scarf, again, in an effort to reduce the amount of damage that he winds up taking. It's not a huge evade buff, knights are not the dodgiest units to begin with, but it helps where it helps, and again, whatever advantage we can get in keeping ourselves alive here is good. Then he does not have a Pursuit ring, so simple as it can be. Assaulting Lance targeting the lowest HP enemy to try and get the execute so you can get your AP back and do it all over again. And then again, Quick Guard to reduce the amount of damage that you take, make yourself a little bit tankier. And again, helps more than you might think. There have been so many times that this squad is running around the battlefield with single-digit HP, maybe not even adding up to double-digit HP if you add all of their total HP together, or all of their remaining HP together, I should say, and yet they're still just crushing because they're quick, they can start setting up chain attacks super easily, and even Berenice being fairly slow as a sellsword doesn't really matter because she starts throwing in following slashes and powerful calls to boost her allies before she even necessarily gets the heavy slash in. It's a very fun build. There's so much that I know you'd be able to do with this. And it's great, too, because, again, as the leader, Berenice provides the squad her high stamina of 6. So you can keep these guys out on the battlefield fighting for a long time before you're forced to give them the chance to rest. I love this build. It clears squad after squad. You've been seeing it on screen. I've got some footage up now. Total blast. Highly recommend that you check out this or something similar, especially once you get a sellsword to level 10, and then you get access to their killing chain, which is literally the exact same thing as the Assaulting Lance, except it's just the sellsword version of it. So imagine the blender that that'll turn into once she's level 10 as well. It's a total blast. And finally, we have what I'm calling the Pyromaniac Squad, featuring Wizard Aush, Hunter Rolf, and Hoplite Hodrick. This is a setup that is pretty early in the build, and I wanted to highlight one from earlier in the demo, specifically because I wanted to show just how early you can start to get builds like this online. So, what is it here to do? The primary thing to focus on, the primary unit that we're built around, is Aush, and specifically one particular ability that he has. This is his Fire Burst ability coming from the Chlorotic Rod. The Chlorotic is a rod that you get when you recruit Aush during his quest, and it has a very interesting ability on it, which is Fire Burst. It activates at the end of a battle, it attacks a single enemy with magic, but importantly, it hits all enemies if the target is burning, and this is a passive point ability, not an active point ability. What this means is this squad clears really, really hard. We'll go through the whole thing. So, as far as Aush's equipment is concerned, he has, of course, the Chlorotic Rod. It's a fairly decent rod, primarily here for the Fire Burst ability. Then he has a Silk Hood to increase his magical attack, because we want him to be able to deal as much damage as possible with that Fire Burst attack. And a Silken Scarf, on the off chance that he does get targeted by an attack, he has a greater chance to dodge out of the way, because Aush is a fragile, delicate little man who will crumple at the slightest inclination. The tactics and his abilities are as follows. He starts off with Fireball, targeting the highest HP enemy. This is a pretty high damage attack, and it does inflict burn, so enemies will take even more damage if they start their turn after they get lit on fire. And as such, we want to hit the highest HP enemy in the hopes that they survive long enough to get fire bursted. Next up, we have Magic Counter, targeting one or fewer enemies. The idea here is that you don't need to AoE the squad down if there's only one enemy left. So if there's only one enemy left, they happen to attack Aush, he can just Magic Counter and blow them up, because Magic Counter on its own does deal more single target damage than Fire Burst. This should only trigger in the situation where there's only one enemy unit left, wherein that higher single target damage will be more valuable. Finally, then, of course, we have Fire Burst itself with its condition set to target a burning enemy. Obviously, that's what we want this to do, so we can detonate the entire enemy squad. Simple, effective, to the point, but how is it being supported? Well, that's where we have to talk about Rolf. Rolf the Hunter has an interesting opportunity here as we pick up a Flame Bow in the course of completing Oclesis the Angel's quest. Flame Bow reads as follows. Flame Arrow. Attack a single enemy. Inflicts burn. Simple as. Deals literally the same amount of damage as a hunter's normal attack. It will still crit if you're targeting a flyer. However, it will also get that burn damage over time and set up for the big explosion. Much like with Aush's Fireball, I have this set to target the highest HP enemy, as again, we don't want to accidentally blow them up too early. And we have our Eagle Eye ability to just make sure that we can hit whatever it is we're targeting. For our equipment, we have, again, the Flame Bow, a Warrior's Medallion to give increased physical damage, because even though it's a fire attack, this is a physical attack, as well as some extra crit rate to pick off dangerous enemies, and a Vitality Talisman to make Rolf a bit tankier, because it's unlikely that he's going to be getting guarded for by Hodrick. Speaking of Hodrick, we'll hit him up now. This Hodrick build is literally as simple as it can possibly get, with one small caveat. If you've played the Unicorn Overlord demo, you know how Hoplites play, you know how Hodrick plays. I don't even have any special gear on him. He just has a Recruit's Short Spear, a Bronze Great Shield, and some gauntlets. Look, the majority of this is stuff that he comes in with. I just bought him a fancier spear so he could get a little bit of extra XP. That's it. It's what he does that's important here. He's got two abilities. Sting, targeting the lowest HP enemy, so that way if something survives the explosion, he can run in and finish him off. And more importantly, Heavy Cover, standard Hoplite ability, but specifically prioritizing casters. So if, say, a feisty archer or something tries to snipe Aush down before we can trigger the explosion, Hodrick can jump in the way, block it. Actually, I just had the realization, prioritizing caster would not do what we want it to do. We specifically want to just have the condition caster. This way, he will guaranteed only cover Aush rather than accidentally waste to get on Rolf if Rolf is the one who gets attacked, because, you know, he's only going to prioritize casters, but he'll still protect someone else if it's not set properly. So make sure you set your conditions properly. Like I've said a few times throughout the video, these are not super optimized builds. You can do way more just in the demo alone to really maximize some of these strategies. But I wanted to get the juice kind of flowing for you guys, get the gears turning, really give you an idea of what you can start setting up early with just a couple of synergistic abilities. Like, I thought of the Aush squad just when I saw the Flame Bow. I was like, that's another way for us to set up burning for Fire Burst. That's interesting. And we just threw something together. Are there better ways to put this squad together? Probably. I haven't had too much time to sit and just tinker with individual unit builds, but you know I'm going to over time. As such, make sure that you pay attention to what gear is being dropped, what gear can be purchased, and what abilities you unlock as you level your units up, because whole new strategies could open up with just one change to your gear, your tactics, or the abilities that you have on hand. Fancy synergistic builds and insane team comps are great and all, but sometimes you just need to have a base to work from when building a unit. And today, we're going to talk about just that. So what is the topic of the day today? Well, I've had a number of people ask me about just general tips and suggestions for building out units in the mid-game in Unicorn Overlord. I've done some videos about specific team comps as well as just unit building in general in the early game previously, but not as much for the mid-game once you start getting promoted units, upgrading your units to size 4, etc., etc. So we're going to look at an example of one of my best units with Elaine's squad that has been absolutely dominating in my live streams, and explain what makes it work so well and how you can kind of emulate that experience with your own unit building. I'm using Elaine's squad here specifically because it's an all-rounder squad. It's not something super focused or with a very particular purpose like Bruno's Bombardiers or the Super Tax Brothers that I've talked about at length here. And I think that makes it a good place to build from for other people. So let's take a look at it here. Starting off with our analysis, we of course have Elaine himself. Elaine is promoted to a High Lord at this point, as are all of the characters in all of my units. This is just after clearing Elheim, but this squad has been online pretty much since we left Drakkenhold, actually, so pretty easy thing to get set up. I'm rocking Offensive Guardian with Elaine's stats, and you can see he's pretty damn tanky. Has good offense, good defense, good evasion. He's all around a very strong unit. And yes, of course, Elaine being very powerful does make it much easier to build an all-rounder squad, but he does have a lot of good support that we will get into here as well. As a frontliner, though, it is important to highlight what Elaine has going on. Right now, I have him set up with an all-around pretty decent tanking setup. He's got the Templar shield that gives him some extra physical defense and guard rate. Nothing crazy, but that extra guard rate in particular does help keep him alive pretty dang well. He has the White Knight's shield, physical defense of 4, guard rate of 15%, with plus 25% guard efficiency and max HP of plus 15. Part of the reason I have this on him is because of the life share ability. Activates after an ally is hit by an attack, share HP with an ally, and it gives 50% of the user's HP. Now, I've been back and forth on whether I want to continue using this or not. I've had it on right now just for the guard efficiency and the max HP bonus, although you'll notice I don't have life share currently in use. Sometimes I like to have life share on here, but seeing as how Elaine is the only frontliner I have in this squad, he hasn't really needed it. You could, of course, then swap to something else, like, say, the Nameless Guard shield to get blindness immunity and be able to potentially use medium cover if you feel the need to. Something like the Viper shield to get poison immunity. There's a lot of shields in the game, and kind of swapping these on the fly to suit the needs of whatever battle that you're in is certainly a good way to go about it. Heck, we could go with the White Rider shield. Stun immunity, guard seal immunity, and that's it. Not bad. Good physical defense. Like, you have options here. I just like the max HP bonus because Elaine does take a fair amount of damage, and even though he blocks a lot of it, he will get chipped down over time until heals can kick in, so it's been a pretty beneficial thing to have on him. We then have, mainly for lore reasons, the Ring of the Unicorn, but that extra HP and guard rate is certainly not bad, and seeing as how Elaine is the only one who can use it, I do like to keep it on him just to free up other accessories for other characters, and he certainly hasn't needed anything else. Finally, we have the Thunderclap Ring, an item that I just got at the end of Elheim, and this replaced a silver bangle that I had, which is somewhere in here. Or silver circlet, I should say. As you can see, it's literally a straight upgrade. Gives 2 extra magic defense, gives stun immunity, and even more max HP. And that's one of the things you really have to watch for when you're using a sole frontliner like this. What status effects are they going to get hit with? Because if your frontliner gets blinded, frozen, stunned most particularly, they're not going to be able to block for themselves or potentially block for your allies anymore, and things could fall apart really fast. So in particular, if you are using a solo frontliner or potentially even a duo of frontliners, having some good status effect resistance items, especially stun resist or stun immunity, will be very, very valuable. Then we have Cavalry Slayer for if there happens to be cavalry, just to be able to put the kibosh on, enemy knights or radiant knights or what have you. And then Lean Edge as our primary bread and butter here. Attack a single enemy, recover 25% HP if the attack hits, recover another 25% HP if the target is defeated. This is another reason that I have such high max HP on Elaine, because it synergizes really well with that max HP. It's not 25% of the damage that you deal, it's 25% of your HP. So just at base, we're recovering a little over 25 HP per hit with Lean Edge. 50% total for like, what, 53-ish health if you get a kill. That's insane. That makes Elaine an incredibly effective frontline tank and kind of puts him in a similar position to me as gladiators with the just massive amount of self-healing that he can get, even if the conditions for that activation are different. Then we have a few different abilities here. Rapid Order activates at the start of a battle, grants all allies plus 20 initiative. Luminous Cover activates for an ally's attack to cover an ally with a medium guard and grants that ally plus 20% defense. And Noble Guard activates for being hit by a physical attack, block an enemy attack with a medium guard, grants the user plus 20% defense, and grants the user plus 1 passive point if the user has 50% HP or less. All very strong abilities. Again, very specific to Elaine, except for Luminous Cover, which you can get off certain shields, things like that. But the idea here is that Elaine serves as a pretty self-sufficient frontliner who can hold the line and stay alive, allowing his backline to do their work. And that's largely what you want for a general all-rounder squad. That can be an evade tank, it can be a tank like a gladiator who can self-heal, it could be a legionnaire who can take a lot of physical punishment, but that's the type of thing that you're going to want in the front line more often than not. There are some more less general use things like evade tank sword fighters or things like that, or even frontline wyverns if you're going to be using parry and stuff like that a lot. But overall, this is the type of unit that you want in your front line. Something that's durable enough to survive a bunch of attacks, potentially can protect itself regularly, protect its allies, self-heal. That's what you're going to be looking for. Moving on to our back line, this is where our real big damage comes in and our overall squad support as well. Starting with Gerald or Gerald, our Lance Connect. He has the Heaven's Wing Sword, good physical attack, gives extra accuracy and evasion. The Squire's Shield for quick cover, giving himself the ability to cover for an ally. This generally is used to block for Elaine, making sure that Elaine can survive even longer, which is very nice. A Lapis Pendant so that he can get more usage of quick cover, of Vengeful Guard, Banishing Pursuit, all of his various powerful passive point abilities. And then the Liberator's Bracelet, which is giving him another powerful passive point ability. Gerald here is just for the raw damage, man. He is able to block, which is nice. Being able to spread damage around to have all of your units survive before a big heal comes in at the end of the combat is very powerful. But primarily, he's here to slay out and slay out really hard. He's got Killing Chain and Bastard's Cross to make sure that that happens with very frequent regularity. And his massive physical attack of 68 ensures that he's able to carve through a lot of powerful enemies. This is in part comes from the fact that he's got dual offensive growths. Thank you to the patrons who's requested this character and made sure that he absolutely is ready to slap. And overall, he's a very powerful piece. This is one part of what you're going to want, either in the front line or the back line of any given squad. Just a raw, heavy damage, single target machine is going to be very capable in most general use squads. Either for just being able to carve through a particular enemy unit and take them out quickly before they're able to start dealing damage to you, or potentially having enough raw physical power, or magical power if you're using a mage in this slot, which also works, to pound through even the toughest of defenses. There have been times where I really thought that a Legionnaire was going to cause a lot of problems for me, and then Gerald just came in with Bastard's Cross and cut them in half. It was insane. If you didn't know, Bastard's Cross has a 70 physical potency, 2 hit count effect going on, attack a single enemy, but notably, potency increases based on the target's HP with a maximum increase of plus 60. So this is a huge single target damaging attack, and it's going to be massively beneficial for you to have at least one character in a squad that can just nuke something if you need them to. Moving over here to Thais, our Sainted Knight. She's honestly probably the core of this squad, even despite how powerful Elaine is, because Sainted Knights are just so good. So what does she have going on here? She also has a Templar's Sword, much like Elaine. Same benefits, literally for the same reasons. It's just a good all-around defensive piece. It still lets her deal good damage. An Azure Crest Shield to give her good overall defensive capabilities and an extra passive point, which Sacred Knights desperately want. A Lapis Pendant for the same reason, and then a Silk Hood to increase her magical attack further to make her heals stronger. She has a stat spread of Hardy Offensive, which gives her very, very solid defensive stats. Her physical defense is a little lacking, but with the shield, that helps make up for it, and her magical defense is massive. Mages are not going to do anything to her. And she's got decent physical attack, and even better magical attack if you choose to use, like, a magical blade on her, which we can. I've used the Runic Blade on her before. It just hasn't been super necessary at this point, so I've swapped it over to other characters. As far as the skills that we have on her, first we have Saint's Blade, a physical potency of 50 with a 2 hit count. Attacks a single enemy, extra potency about 25 if Thais is at 100% HP, which she often is, and it grants her +1 passive point if the attack hits. Not even if it kills, just if it hits. So I like to have Thais come out swinging with this near the beginning of the fight, deal some good damage, get a passive point back if she's already used one, and then, from then on, she's going to be row healing. Row heal is a ridiculously powerful skill. The fact that this is on a cavalry unit that's also armored and has a shield and can do good physical damage and has magical shields is insane. I seriously think Sainted Knight might be one of the best, if not the best classes in the game, but that's a topic for a different video. Row heal's nasty. It just restores moderate HP to a row of allies, and moderate HP at this point in the game is like basically all of your HP if you're not laid out on the floor bleeding out. It's insanely strong. Primarily, she's going to be using this on the back line, but if a lane has some damage on him and hasn't managed to heal it up due to lean edge, she can use this on him as well to keep him going. Then she has Row Barrier, activates before an ally is hit by a magic attack, negate the next magic damage dealt to a row of allies, also negates afflictions. As you get later into the game, you're going to be running into a lot of afflictions, a lot of AoE magic attacks, and having ways to defend against that in any squad is going to be massively important. I'm not kidding when I say you can absolutely slap a Radiant or Sainted Knight into a squad, any squad, and they'll probably be better off for it if they are not hyper-focused into doing one thing that that knight would not do. Just the healing, the barriers, the overall defensive capabilities while still being able to fight, it's huge. And I think it's one of the main reasons why this squad is able to handle so much. Like, you'll have seen some footage up on screen as we're talking here, where almost anything that I throw this squad against just folds. It's wild. Then we have Holy Guard, activates before being hit by a physical attack, block an enemy attack with a medium guard, and prevents debuffs. And then Magic Barrier, before an ally is hit by a magic attack, negate the next magic damage dealt to an ally, also negates afflictions. This is just the single target version of Row Barrier. Typically, Row Barrier is going to wind up being what you use as you get into the later game, but if it's not a whole row that is attacked, Magic Barrier can activate to protect a single ally. It's very good stuff. Having a unit like this that's going to be able to heal and provide extra defense to your squads to keep them alive becomes invaluable as you get later into the mid-game and just into the mid-game in general, just because AoE attacks become so much more apparent. And losing one of your units, or I should say losing one of your characters in a unit to spammed AoE attacks early on, or spammed magic attacks, especially in Elheim, feels terrible and is going to severely impact the efficacy of that unit until you can get that person back on their feet, and then they're likely to just go back down again anyway if you don't have solid defense. So having something like a Sainted Knight or a Cleric or a Shaman that is going to be a very powerful defensive support unit is going to be huge for any general use squad. Finally, we have Octavia, our Wyvern Master. She's actually set as the squad leader to get flying in there. I like having at least one flying unit in a squad whenever possible because you can always switch them to the leader to navigate rough terrain if you have to in any given map, whatever. But really, the primary reason that Octavia is here is for AoE damage. The rest of this squad is very much either single target damage or tanking and support. And when squads tend to get bigger, like 4 or 5 characters in a squad, you're going to need some AoE damage if you're going to carve through everything in a reasonable amount of time. That's what Octavia does. She's set up with a stat spread of offensive precise, so she's getting good crits, she's got good physical attack damage, while still being fairly resilient due to being a Wyvern Master and having good self-defense. And her setup is as follows. She has the Silver Trident, giving her a mix of physical and magical attack with a focus on physical, which is great, because that's primarily what a Wyvern is going to be doing, with the Lightning Shaker ability. Lightning Shaker is awesome. It deals 100 physical and magical potency to a row of enemies and inflicts stun. And this is key. Not only do we have a magical effect that can deal with a row of enemies, remember we were just talking with our Sainted Knight about the prevalence of AoE magic attacks, but also it's going to stun. And having something that can actually do some statuses to temporarily remove enemies from the fight while you deal with them helps immensely with your survivability. Like, I cannot overemphasize enough how strong stun is. There's a reason that we have an anti-stun ring on a lane. If you get stunned, you may as well be dead in the water. You can't defend yourself, you can't take actions to heal yourself, protect yourself, try and take out an enemy so that they can't hit you or your allies. It's devastating. And being able to do that to an entire row near the start of the fight, brutal. We then have the Shawl of Repose, which is giving us the ability to use Wing Rest and recover our own HP. You can see there's a lot of self-healing in this squad, as well as some AoE healing from our Sainted Knight. And that's big. Just having that durability and survivability for a general use squad, again, going to be very, very strong. We then have a Carnelian Pendant to make it so we have another AP after we use Lightning Shaker, and then a Pursuance Bracelet to make use of our passive points to get some extra damage in when and where we can. As far as our abilities are concerned, we have Lightning Shaker to just go off on a row of enemies. Don't really need anything specific here. I just want her to be using this. And then Diving Thrust to attack a single target, prioritizing cavalry because Wyverns are just good cavalry slayers. We then have Dragon's Roar. This is actually something we just acquired at the end of my previous stream, and I'm not 100% on actually wanting to use this. I haven't changed anything around with it yet because I haven't had the chance to experiment with it. It activates at the start of a battle and inflicts initiative -20 on all enemies. And I mean, that's good. Like, reducing your enemy's initiative can be quite nice, but the thing is, this is a fairly speedy squad to begin with, and even our characters that aren't particularly fast have a lot of follow-up attacks and counterattacks, so they're still doing stuff even before they get the chance to attack. So I'm not really sure that I want Dragon's Roar here. I left it on for an example point in this video about maybe why you don't necessarily want to use every skill in a character's kit, and I think this is one of those. We're going to take that off. Instead, we're focusing on using Pursuit, Deflect, Wing Rest, and Ground Counter, the primary focus being Pursuit and Ground Counter, to deal extra damage to enemies, sneak those extra attacks in when and where you can. If you're familiar with Magic the Gathering, I kind of view these as instant spells, where you can cast them like kind of in between enemies' turns or in between different actions going on the battlefield to eke in little bits of advantage here and there that really rack up and can potentially lead to a one-round win in the right circumstances, which is quite often with the way this squad is set up. Pursuit, of course, is just bringing in extra physical attacks whenever an ally attacks, which, with a Wyvern, is a fair bit of damage. And then Ground Counter activates after an enemy attacks with an active skill, does the same thing, counterattacks a single enemy, and has plus 100 potency versus cavalry targets. So, whether it's us being attacked or our allies attacking, we can sneak some extra damage in here with Octavia that she might not otherwise get. Then, if she does happen to get attacked by something, we do have Deflect to negate that damage and increase her own evasion. Doesn't happen very often since we have Elaine out here ready to guard for us, but if it works, it works. And then Wing Rest, if we happen to take some damage from like a Ranger and survive, or some like AoE magic or something like that, we can use this, get some extra HP back, doubled if we're like burning or poisoned or something like that. Again, resilience is key here, and this squad is very, very good at resilience. And that's the number one thing I think you need to consider when it comes to building a general use squad. Your general purpose units need to be out there able to handle a wide variety of different combat scenarios. They need to be able to traverse terrain well, so cavalry, flying units, or if there's a lot of rough terrain that you need to be able to trudge through that maybe your cavalry can't get through or whatever, infantry units are good for that. They need to have a good amount of stamina, being able to have potentially a leader like, say, I don't know, our Lance Connect here that we can switch to if there's going to be a protracted engagement on the ground before we're able to get stamina back. He's got 6 stamina, so he can really make sure that the squad is able to hold for a long period of time. You want to have a lot of different self-sustaining abilities, heals, defensive capabilities, ways to negate damage, ways to absorb damage, ways to get your own active points and passive points back, etc., etc. Because the more likely you are to clear a fight in one round of combat without your units going down, the longer you're going to be able to fight out there on the battlefield. Finally, making sure that you have a variety of different types of attacks to handle different situations is great. Gerald here can deal with high HP enemies with Bastard's Cross. Octavia can deal with cavalry. Elaine can just kind of handle anything he wants to. He's not particularly effective against any one type of unit other than Cavalry Slayer, kind of nerfing their points that they can use. But he's able to survive attacks from pretty much anything, which is good. And then Theiss is out here as an anti-magic specialist, making sure that the team doesn't just get nuked. There are other things that I could incorporate in here. Of course, we could either get more magic damage in or potentially something like a breaker to inflict guard seal and deal with armored units, things like that. Once we get this up to a 5-man squad, we could incorporate something like a shaman to really nerf enemies' damage output, or we could maybe put in something like a ranger or a sword fighter to deal with the enemies that are particularly dodgy, hard to hit, backliners, stuff like that. Generally, when you have a unit like this, just having that versatility is key. That's why my characters like Virginia is so good, because she has a bunch of her own built-in anti-particular unit effectiveness skills, which is great. All in all, though, this is an absolutely baller squad. You can swap these pieces around to do different types of things, incorporate different classes, different unique characters, whatever it is you want to do. But this overall setup is going to be a very strong foundation for you to build from to make your own general purpose units. If you can get 3 or 4 of this type of squad online, you'll be set for the majority of the game, and then you can build out your other more specified squads like your Bruno's Bombardiers or your Super Tax Bros or what have you. Things that have much more focused capabilities that they are extremely deadly in, but then maybe aren't as equipped to deal with a wide variety of scenarios. These are the guys that you're going to have that can help those other specialized squads with that. With that said, I hope this was very helpful for you. This is a fun little quick one to put together, and I figured it was going to be a good example of how people can kind of build their units out to be more effective, because I've seen a lot of, like, I'm just kind of throwing random crap together and seeing what works, and I don't feel like I'm being a very good tactician as a result, because I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just kind of bashing my head against the wall until things work. Try a general setup like this. Take whatever pieces you have available to you and put them together in a similar fashion to this and see what works. I bet you'll wind up in a situation where you have better synergy and better survivability against a much wider range of enemies. So you've seen examples of how I've built my squads, especially for the end game, but maybe you want to build one for yourself a little bit from scratch? Here's a guide on how you're going to do that. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel.
Unicorn Overlord.
I have heard your cries, the clamor, the noise, very much appreciated. Feedback is very good for helping me decide what I'm going to do on the channel. But I've heard you all in asking for an overall build guide for endgame units for Unicorn Overlord. I know plenty of people have beaten the game already, but it may prove of interest to you even if you have, and if you have not, well, this is an idea of how you might be able to put together your endgame squads, as this is where a lot of the challenge of the game is going to come together, especially in these last few fights. How do you put a team together that is not only going to survive, but thrive when you're dealing with a large number of enemy units? That's what we're going to talk about today, and the squad that we're going to be featuring for this example is Lex's squad. Technically Octavia's squad right now, but Lex is actually the main leader here, so we're going to make him the leader. I know that might anger some of you Lex haters in the comments, but listen, Lex is my boy, and he's actually a pretty good squad leader, so we're going to talk about what exactly makes this unit tick. So what is the idea here? Well, there's two general types of squads or units that you're going to be using in the end game. Either something that is very laser focused for a particular type of goal, something like, say, you know, my Trinity Rain combo squad, or something that you just want to be able to deal with a variety of different combat scenarios, and that can come in a lot of different flavors. Something like what we have going on here with Lex's unit, or something like Bruno's unit that has a lot of tankiness and then one huge damage dealer with Bruno, or something like Pierre's unit with my cavalry that are meant to have a bunch of damage dealers with a little bit of backline support. There's a lot of ways that you can go about this, but the end goal is to have a unit that can survive a number of different combat scenarios that is not too specific that they're going to get super hard countered, while also being able to deal with dealing damage, taking out enemies, generally being effective at pushing forward, since pushing forward is the most important thing in Unicorn Overlord, with time limits and the like. Since we've talked about some of these other units before, like my cavalry unit and my Bruno unit, I figured Lex's squad as a very much generic all-rounder squad would be the best example to go with, and as such, we are. Looking at it here, there's a few things to take note of. First of all, we have two frontline quote-unquote tanks. Of course, one is a little bit tankier than the other. Lex the Vanguard as a certified tank expert, and Octavia the Wyvern Master, who has some decent survivability options in her kit due to the type of class that she is and the abilities that she has on hand. After our frontliners here, we have an array of backliners for damage and utility. Gerald the Lance Connect for just raw damage output without necessarily being the tankiest unit, so we don't really want him on the front line. Same thing for Batista the Werewolf here, although his goal is to focus down particularly nasty, squishy units and also kind of bring the gas at the end of a fight, since werewolves do tend to get stronger the fewer enemies there are or the less HP they have. And then, of course, Thais the Sainted Knight, who's here primarily to keep the entire squad going while also being able to deal some damage herself. The ultimate goal in any team like this is you need these three things: your tank, your damage, and your support. The combinations that those come in, how many supports you have, how many tanks you have, how many damage dealers you have, that can vary greatly, but these are the three pillars that you want in any major general successful squad, and that's why we're doing this here. Lex, my boy. So, what is the goal of a Vanguard here? Partially, it's to provide arrow cover for our flyer, since we do have a flying ally in this squad who is absolutely going to fold to arrows. Lex is meant to deal with that with his arrow cover. Beyond that, he is meant to stand on the front line, absorb as many hits as possible with his good defensive stats, and deal a modicum of damage in the process. To that end, we have the following gear: the Rosalaris sword, which gives him a base passive point +1, as well as 30% HP recovery, which is very, very nice, and maxed out physical attack. The White Rider's shield, one of the best shields that you can give a normal shield, not great shield wielding character, gives good guard efficiency, good guard rate, physical defense, as well as stun immunity and guard seal immunity, which are key for any frontline tanky defensive unit. The Citadel Guard's Sabatons, giving some physical defense, and the critical guarding impetus skill, which activates after guarding an attack and grants the user +1 AP. This actually gives Lex a deceptive amount of capability when it comes to damage dealing and overall effectiveness. And then, of course, a Lapis Pendant to max out our passive points. As far as our skills are concerned, we have the following. It's very basic. Defender, 75 physical potency, 2 hit count, 100% hit rate. Attack a single enemy, grants the user plus 50% physical defense, and grants the user +1 passive point if the attack hits. With this, we are able to buff our own physical defense, we're able to get even more passive points if we've already guarded an attack, and overall is a very powerful ability. I love Defender. It is the skill that makes Vanguard come alive in the late game. It's actually quite capable, and the damage from it is decent. Like, yeah, you're not going to have the biggest damage around, but it's not bad. Not bad at all. Then we have Shield Bash. Attack a single enemy, inflicts stun. I have this here. I never actually use it on Lex as a Vanguard. Like, you could, but honestly, the times that I ever would are pretty much non-existent, which is why I haven't set up a particular condition to use it. I mainly have it here in case we wind up in an odd situation where guarding impetus is triggered, but only once. So we have 3 AP total. We've already used Defender. We only have 1 AP left over. We want to be able to use that on something. Shield Bash is as good of a use as any. Getting a free stun on something is certainly nice, and it could mean potentially stopping something from getting an attack off entirely, which is pretty awesome. So it's here just as a backup option, but more often than not, we're going to be spamming more Defenders than anything else. Then, of course, we have the Guarding Impetus from the Citadel Guard's Sabatons. We want this to be triggering as much as possible to get as much AP as possible. Arrow Cover for if anything tries to snipe, particularly our Wyvern. This will technically work on anything, but everything else in the squad can generally deal with at least taking 1 hit from an archer. It's really the Wyvern that we got to watch, and this is here for her. And then Quick Guard, if we happen to get attacked directly, Lex can protect himself, which then will also, trigger Guarding Impetus. So, like, hey, not too bad. Then our second tank, as well as one of our damage dealers here, Octavia the Wyvern Master, she has the following. She has a Silver Trident Plus, forged, so she's getting as much damage as possible. Gives her +10 accuracy, as well as Lightning Shaker, attacks a row of enemies, and inflicts stun. As a tank and aggro handler, being able to stun a group of enemies to slow them down and let the actual damage dealers in the backline do their work is huge, and it's one of the reasons that I like Wyvern Masters so much. They are tanky, they can deal damage, and they also have nice utility through their weapons, such as the Silver Trident. This is an awesome utility piece. Then we have the Undead Ring. It gives poison and death blow immunity, as well as granting an extra passive point, which is super nice. Our Cornelian Pendant for an extra AP, which again, very, very nice. And a Pursuance Bracelet for some extra damage thrown in there when our other attackers are getting in. We have Diving Thrust, targeting Cavalry, allowing us to attack a single enemy. Cavalry targets cannot guard against this attack, and gets +50 potency versus Cavalry targets. This is very much a utility piece, not something that we're going to be relying on overly much, but if there is a particularly important cav target, we will hit them with this. Then we have Tempest Drive, targeting a full column. Attack column enemies with a piercing strike. Cavalry targets cannot guard against this attack, and becomes a true strike and critical if the user is below 50% HP. This is something that can come out and will a lot of the time, and deals very good damage to a column of enemies. Now, the idea here is that as one of our frontline tanks, this will come out only if our own HP is less than 50%. So if we've taken some hits, there's maybe a bunch of fast enemies in the enemy squad, we can strike back really hard. With this, if the enemy is faster than us, then they're able to get some damage in. We have the capability to come in, counter, punish, deal a ton of damage, and turn from a tank into a damage dealer, which is generally what you want. The situations where you're going to want 2 full-out tanks, like say maybe a Vanguard and a Legionnaire, 2 Vanguards, whatever, are pretty few and far between. So having a unit that can help in tanking and then turn into a damage dealer with something like Tempest Drive is very, very nice. Speaking of which, what if we don't wind up hitting that threshold where our HP is low enough to use Tempest Drive? That's where Lightning Shaker comes in. This is going to be the bread and butter. This is going to be what you use the most frequently to absolutely punish the enemy. 100 physical potency, 100 magical potency, attack a row of enemies, inflict stun. This is the big one. Just being able to get most likely 2 to 3 enemies stunned and have a good chunk of damage on them so that your backline can start cleaning them up is super nice. And with something like, say, a werewolf, where you want enemies to be low, this is a great way to start getting them low, or potentially even finish some off so that your werewolf's damage gets even better. Then we have Pursuit, activates after an ally attacks, follow up a single enemy, just more free damage in there, and then Deflect to help with our tanking. This activates before being hit by a melee attack, negates melee damage for a single hit, and grants the user plus 20 evasion. This leans into the idea that as a flying unit, Wyvern Masters are generally going to be pretty dodgy against enemy frontliners because most of the time they're going to be infantry, grounded, etc. So you're going to be dodging a lot of attacks. But if you are going to get hit, Deflect comes in, blocks that attack, gives you even more evasion, so it's even less likely that it has to trigger in the future. This is a great option. I love having an off-tank like a Wyvern Master that can handle the job, maybe not as good as a dedicated tank, but enough that then they'll still have the HP and the points left over after absorbing a couple of hits to come in swinging and help the team out with even more damage. It's a great setup. You have good options for this, like things with, Griffin Master, potentially even rogues, werefoxes, stuff like that. It's very, very nice. And of course, as a flyer, you can have her as a co-leader, so that if you need to be able to fly over terrain, you can switch to her being the leader, and then you can navigate around all that nasty terrain that would otherwise get in the way, which is awesome. Of course, Lex is going to stay as the leader for now. The reason I like to have Lex as the leader primarily is as infantry, he gets 6 stamina, so this squad is going to be able to fight for a very good amount of time. And you have the resist ranged assist skill, which is not only going to protect your Wyvern, since, ranged assists are going to deal bonus damage to flyers anyway, but as one of your frontline units is going to be absorbing a lot of hits, there's a good chance that these are the guys who are going to be targeted first by any ranged assist enemies on the battlefield, of which there are likely going to be a lot, and this is going to help protect you from that damage significantly. Now, for our back line, we have to talk about Gerald the Lance Connect. If you know me, you know I love my sellswords, I love my Lance Connects. I know there's going to be people who try to roast me for the pronunciation in the comments. I've gotten so much feedback about how to say it, how to not say it, how you can't say it in English, etc., etc. I don't care anymore. I'm saying Lance Connect. Come at me if you want. The idea here is just deal damage. That is what Lance Connects do, and they do it very, very well. We're set up with a basic steel sword. You can put any stronger sword in here, like sort by physical attack and find the best thing, toss a greatsword on there, whatever you want. It's just what I happen to have available for this squad at the time. The higher the physical attack, the better, and if you have some bonus effects in there, all the better. I have an Azure Crest Shield Plus for the maxed out physical defense, guard rate, guard efficiency, passive points, whatever. Whatever utility shield you would want on something like this in the back line, since they're not going to be tanking overly much, is also totally fine. If you want them to have blindness immunity, self-healing, whatever, pick what you like if they are able to wield a shield. Then, Wolfpack Gauntlets gives us the Wolfpack skill. Activates at the start of a battle. Grants plus 20% physical attack to all allies, which is what everyone in this squad cares about, and gives plus 50% critical rate to bestial targets. Funny enough, we have one of those. Finally, Knight's Medallion. Physical defense plus 2, physical defense plus 10%, guard rate plus 10%. This is just an I'm paranoid option, because I hate when my backline gets blown up unexpectedly, and that my Lance Connect does like having a little bit of extra defensive measures. If you want to go all in on something physical, that is totally fine. Toss something like a beret on here. Toss something like, I don't know, whatever you want. Some extra Carnelians or something else that's going to boost your physical attack. Maybe a Veteran's Eye Patch for some crit rate. Whatever makes you happy. Totally fine. It depends entirely on what the unit is trying to do and what the class in question wants to do. For our damage, Bastard's Cross. Highest HP. Attack a single enemy. Potency increases based on the target's HP. Maximum increase plus 60. This is the powerhouse. This is going to chunk real hard, especially with the buffs that you're getting from things like Wolfpack Gauntlets. This is really, really nice. I cannot overstate how strong it is. You're going to chunk something. Then we have Killing Chain if we happen to wind up in the situation where we need it just to be able to deal some extra damage to something. Not going to happen in the majority of cases. Wolfpack, again, we're getting that damage buff for the entire team. This is awesome, and it leaves us with a passive point left over for following Slash. Counterattack a single enemy, grants the user +1 passive point if the attack hits. So as we start to get attacked and our tanks are either dodging, taking hits, whatever, we're getting in there, dealing damage, getting the passive point back, and then continuing on from there. Next, Batista the Werewolf. Again, damage dealer. Vorpal Sword, Carnelian Pendant for the extra AP, Green Beret and Veteran's Eye Patch for even more damage, either in just pure damage or crit rate. Very simple stuff here. We got Wild Fang to attack a row of enemies. Potency increases the less HP a target has. Maximum increase +50. And Decimate, attack a single enemy. Potency increases the fewer enemies there are. Maximum increase +100. Then we have Killing Pursuit. Activates after an ally attacks. Follow-up attack a single enemy. And grants the user +1 AP if the target is defeated. And Bestial Howl. Activates before attacking with an active skill. Grants allies in the user's row +15% physical attack. So, between this and the Wolfpack Gauntlets, our team is going to be slapping. Batista is going first. He's going to weaken the front line of the enemy with Wild Fang, buff the allies' attacks, get in there to decimate something near the end of the fight. It's very solid stuff. Very simple, but very solid stuff. And finally, Thais, who's a combo damage dealer and support in this setup. She also has a Vorpal Sword for as much physical attack as possible, Templar's Shield for extra guard efficiency, HP recovery, etc. A Lapis Pendant, so she can use more of her support abilities, which is very important, and Cloth Gauntlets, so that if something happens to try to poke through on Lex, namely a spear that's going to deal bonus damage to Thais, she's able to guard it more efficiently and to take less damage. She then set up with Saint's Blade, attack a single enemy, +25 potency if the user's at 100% HP, and it grants the user +1 passive point if the attack hits. This is a purely physical potency attack. And yes, while people do generally like to give magical swords to Sainted Knights to make use of their good magical attack, which I'm fully on board with, I prefer to make sure that my Sainted Knight has enough passive points to keep tossing out shields, heals, etc. And Saint's Blade is what's going to allow us to do that. Then we have row heal. We're only going to use that Saint's Blade the first time, and from here we're going to just toss out heals for the front row, the back row, etc. If you want to be a little bit spicy, then you could add a second row heal here with the condition of 50% HP. This way you could make sure that like you're maybe only going to heal in certain scenarios, but like I found that 95% of the time having target HP is less than 75% is fine. Row Barrier, if we happen to get attacked by magical attack, we can block it. Holy Guard, if we get hit by an attack, we can guard it. And then Magic Barrier, if a particular ally is hit by a magic attack, you can guard them as well. The very solid setup that allows us to deal physical damage still. I love it a lot. Now, how does this help you to build your own end game squad? This is an example type of unit. We've gone through the tanks, we've gone through the damage dealers, we've gone through the support, and we've talked about how some of those roles are pulling double duty. Something like our Wyvern Master here, dealing both damage and being a tank. Our Sainted Knight, dealing damage and being support. Wherever you can achieve that, you should. Yes, there's going to be scenarios where you have something like a Druid that is dealing basically no damage outside of very specific setups and scenarios, but her support is going to be worth it. In most cases, though, you want everyone to be able to deal damage. That's where you wind up having situations where you like to have Vanguard over Legionnaire, for example. Legionnaires, or their equivalents, they have absolutely abysmal damage dealing. They're great defensively, but sometimes you want to have a mix of both. That's where the Vanguard comes in. That type of good thing. Use this type of formula. Does it have to follow these numbers exactly? No. Again, as I mentioned, we could look at something like my cavalry squad. We've got 3 primary damage dealers and then 2 characters in the back that deal literally 0 damage in a druid and a bishop. 1 for healing, 1 for enemy debuffs. But that's fine. You've got your support. You've got technically tanks in the cavalry, but realistically you've got another support that makes them tankier by debuffing the enemy. Looking at Bruno's squad, same type of thing. We've got our primary damage dealer in Bruno, we've got a tank in Uriel, and then we've got support in the backline from a druid and a rogue, as well as a kind of mix of support and damage dealing from an elven fencer. You can see the archetypes at play here. If you aren't doing something super focused like a super heavy cavalry squad or a super focused like combo Trinity Reign squad, then you're going to want some more general use all-rounders here, and that's what I want to impart upon you. You don't have to have this exact formation copied. It's the philosophy behind it that you want to utilize, and I hope this has helped you to do so. Not every squad can be a winner, and today we're going to be showing 2 examples of what that looks like. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel.
Unicorn Overlord.
So what are we doing today? Well, I've done a lot of videos covering builds of mine that I recommend you steal inspiration from, or steal wholesale if you so choose, but it doesn't always help to show the things that have worked the best. Learning by example also works when you show things that didn't work, so people have an idea of why it didn't work and how they can improve their own squads if they run into similar issues, right? So I figured I should show my 2 least favorite squads from the end of my initial expert run of Unicorn Overlord that, while not necessarily terrible, definitely don't live up to the standards of the other units that I was able to put together. Only 2 here because I think generally the rest of my squads did wind up working out pretty damn well for the roles that I assigned them, but these 2 in particular they struggled, man. So let's get into it. First off, we're going to be talking about this Swordmaster squad here, Arius' unit. And, yeah, what was the plan here? The plan was to have a lot of fast, critical striking, high damage attacks to come in and devastate enemy squishy units and bring them down with a nice blitz lightning strike before they were able to really get any counterattacks in. The issue is I just was not able to get all these Swordmasters to hit as hard as I wanted them to. So let's go through what we have going on here. First off, we've got Pepe the Viking. Vikings are awesome. I love Vikings. I think they're just very, very solid units. And the main reason that I was using a Viking here was for the Warhorn ability. Activates at the start of a battle, make all allies attack skills unguardable. This way, my Swordmasters would all be able to jump in with their high damage, high crit attacks, and not have a bunch of their damage absorbed by enemies with good block capabilities, shields, etc. Making it unguardable means they could just get in there and do their job, right? That was the idea. We then have Widebreaker to attack a row of enemies and inflict minus 30% physical defense to, again, make our Swordmasters hit even harder. And then just some general gear to help keep our Viking alive. Vikings can be pretty squishy if they don't have cover, so something like a gold bangle to increase defense, a good luminous shield to give some debuff resistance, things like that. Not bad options. Of course, there would be better setups for this, and that could be a contributing factor, maybe something to discuss for all of these units, but given the limitations of gear that I had when I was putting these squads together, this worked for what I was trying to do. Before we talk about our Swordmasters, we will talk about Arius, our Feather Staff here. This, as a unit, definitely felt like it needed some support, and a Feather Staff is going to be pretty good at that. Things like Holy Cradle give a row of allies the ability to withstand 1 lethal blow. I mean, when you don't have any particular tanks, you've got a lot of potential squishy units. If the enemies are able to get through and actually get attacks in after we wind up getting a bunch of hits in on them, then making it so that our guys can actually survive an attack, not terrible. And then Overheal, restore minor HP to a row of allies above their limits, being able to just either heal up if we took a big hit and people are on death's door, or if we get this heal in before we get hit, give them a nice little HP cushion. Very solid, and it did work out fairly well here. We then have Parting Resurrection coming in off of Mother Lelia's staff, giving us the ability to revive one ally, restoring them to 1 HP. Again, when you've got a group that is as potentially squishy as this, being able to get someone back up on their feet at the end of a fight is nice. Holy Breath activates before an ally attacks, restore minor HP to them. If they're afflicted, remove the affliction, and grant the user a +1 passive point. This is a great option, you know, if your Swordmasters got blinded, or they're poisoned, or anything like that. You can have this, heal them up, get some extra HP back, and let them get in there for their full damage. And then finally, Preemptive Heal activates before an ally is attacked, restores moderate HP to an ally. Again, all of the options that we would need here to actually help keep these guys alive. The main issue is that by the end of the game, they're so squishy that they were often getting blown up before a lot of these heals would come into play. And yes, things like Holy Cradle do help with that, but not as much as I was hoping they would. Moving on then to our 3 Swordmasters, Morgane, Alexandra, and Sabine. Morgane I have set up here with a just standard Meteor Slash build with some decently powerful gear, a nice lucky coin to increase crit rate, Master's Gauntlets for some extra evasion, Nimble Fighter, all that type of good stuff. Morgane just wants to be able to stand on the front line and survive, and that's not the easiest thing for a Swordmaster to do, but with things like Nimble Fighter and Parry, it is actually manageable. With Meteor Slash, she's able to get in there and deal a bunch of good damage, and then if she happens to find herself with an extra AP, she can use Keen Edge to deal a good chunk of damage to an enemy. Primarily, the goal here was to have a high enough crit rate that our attacks from Meteor Slash would crit more often than not. Each individual attack in the chain does have its own individual chance to crit, of course, so having extra crit rate here is very good. With things like Nimble Fighter giving us extra physical attack and critical damage when we do get that Meteor Slash in. The issue is that Swordmasters are very fast. So unless you're fighting an equally, if not even faster enemy, then you're going to wind up getting that Meteor Slash off before you're able to get the Nimble Fighter and get the attack buff. So this didn't really work out the way that I was hoping it would, simply because Nimble Fighter wasn't activating when I wanted it to. And that does really crater our Swordmasters damage. Swordmasters, they don't have great physical attack. They're all about the crits, and so they need buffs or they need enemies to be severely weakened to deal their maximum possible damage. Again, that's why the Viking is here. Reduce enemy defense. But also, the Viking is slower than our Swordmaster, so he actually wasn't getting the Wide Breaker in before they were attacking a lot of the time. With judicious use of accessories and things like that, toss a Raven Plume on here to pump Pepe's initiative through the roof, that would help, but I didn't have the resources to do that. I didn't have the forethought to do that when I put this squad together, and so they kind of fell by the wayside. Different ways that you could optimize these squads to make them better, absolutely. Then we have Alexandra set up to have a fairly similar type of thing going on to Morgane. She has the Vorpal Sword and the Wyvern Razor, again, extra crit rate, extra crit damage, Royal Scarf to give her some extra evasion because she doesn't have the Master's Gauntlets, and then a Lucky Coin, again, for extra crit rate and evasion as well. And again, she just wants to get in there, chunk things with Meteor Slash, get a Keen Edge in if she winds up with extra AP somehow, or she loses 1 AP, can't use Meteor Slash, cool, and then Parry to help keep herself alive on the front line. Not a bad setup in practice, but really the issue is, like, you run into any armors, you run into anything that is able to evade, you run into anything that is going to be able to apply multiple debuffs, anything that's going to tank your attack stats like a Druid. There's just so many different ways that a build like this can get countered, and without the appropriate support in the squad, there's very little that you can do about it. Note as well, of course, that these squads are put together the way that they are because of the units that I had available to me, or the characters that I had available to me, based off of what people had requested on like my various community feeds. So I wouldn't necessarily have all of these Swordmasters in a normal run, but I was making do with what I had, and it just didn't quite work out. So if you're a fan of Swordmasters, keep this type of stuff in mind. Finally, we have Sabine, and Sabine was probably the most effective of the 3 in the squad, and she did have a different role as well. As a backline unit, I actually had her set up to be a little bit of an anti-flyer, because that is something else that would severely hamper this squad. As such, she had Double Blast, ready to absolutely pulverize flying targets if possible, Leaping Slash to be able to get some good crit chains in there if possible, and Charged Impetus so that she could give herself more AP and more crit damage. Seeing as how she was in the backline, I wasn't as worried about her having the ability to evade things, so we did set her up with just more raw damage plus AP capabilities. And again, this did work out better. If anyone was doing anything in the squad, it was usually Sabine, but that's because she had a little bit more of a specialized role that no one else in the squad could really handle. So I felt the impact of her contributions a lot more than the others who were just trying to jump in and carve something in half with Meteor Slash. Again, there's a lot of ways that you could make this squad better, no doubt about that. Different units that you could put in it, or different classes that you could put in it to help supplement the Swordmasters, different gear that you could put on them. Don't get me wrong, like there's potential here, but the way I had it set up just did not work, and I figure it's worth showing that off to you guys. Then we have Quinn's unit up here. This is an archer support squad that I put together near the end of the game, and unlike the Swordmaster squad, this one has more legs, but it still has its issues, so we'll talk about it. The goal here was to be a primary archer range support squad, so I could just get some good range support pings in there, change up RNG, pick off annoying enemies at the start of the fight, that kind of thing, but also have it be a squad that could defend itself if it wound up getting attacked, not be something that I would have to baby all the way through the entire map like you would if it was like a 5-woman cleric squad for insane healing assists, you know? To that end, we have a few different things going on here. First, we have Josephine the Shield Shooter. She is set up with an evade tank build, seeing as how she is on the front line. If you saw my recent video about the different archetypes of archers, you should know a fair bit about why I have her set up this way. Since she is on the front line, she's using Heavy Bolt to deal massive damage to a single enemy target, and then she has a lot of support abilities going on. Aid cover, quick reload for follow-up attacks, medical aid to support the backline, different things like that that are really important to have in a squad that has so many archers. The more support that you can have here, the better off that you're going to be. She is rocking the Kingsbow Bastoric, so she can get extra stats, including extra evade, extra damage, and she's probably one of the most, if not the most capable member of the squad, if we're being completely honest here. Very, very solid. I could put this shield shooter in pretty much any squad, and I'd be happy to have her there. Then we have Vivian the Feathersword, also a sort of frontline, dodge tank, disruptor type unit. She's set up with more defensive things like the Zonera Knight Sword, a Vorpal Shield, and then she has a Ruby and Sapphire Pendant, so she can use as many different attacks as possible. She is set up with a discharge build, which is a really fun thing that Feather Swords can do. Activates before attacking with an active skill, consumes all of the user's buffs, and increases attack power for one attack. So the idea here is she holds the front line alongside Josephine. She gets a bunch of buffs through Diurnal Guard and Accelerate. She's reducing enemy capabilities through things like Spiral Sword. She's ready with Hone to Slash to deal a bunch of extra damage, especially with Discharge. She's got some good stuff going on. The issue is that even with those buffs and even with that play, it's a lot of setup to have maybe one good big hit on an enemy. And by the time you're ready to do that, a lot of the time they've already been weakened enough that a normal Hone Slash would just be enough to do them in anyway. So there was a lot of circumstances where I'd be excited for Vivian to really pop off, and then she would just kind of like go after something that really didn't need it, or the only targets that would be left weren't really worthy of the effort that had gone into setting up that big attack, you know? Could that be fixed with a different unit setup or with different priorities on our conditions, things like that? Absolutely, I'm sure it could. But again, the idea here is what I had set up and why it didn't work very well. She was able to hold the line, but not do as much beyond that as I maybe expected that she would. Moving on to Dimitri the Rogue. This is a fairly standard support kind of field medic setup for my rogues that I like to do. He has the Icefall Blade, so you get some extra passive points, a Royal Scarf for the evade, a large aid kit for an end-of-battle party heal, and then a Ruby Pendant so that he has plenty of AP. The idea here was that he could use things like Shadow Bite to inflict blindness, make it so that this fairly squishy team isn't going to just get absolutely devastated by something that would otherwise crush them, as well as our passive steal setup so he can get passive points, deny enemies passive points, all that type of stuff. He does have party aid set up so that we can heal up at the end of the fight. And then he is set with evade. Not too much evade, so that he doesn't actually wind up running out of passive points to use party aid. But if he winds up getting attacked by something like a column attack targeting Vivian, he can still evade it and not get completely demolished right off the bat. Then we have Nils the Sniper. He is going to be the primary damage of this squad, and you can kind of tell we have a bit of a stall sustain thing going on here. He's set up with Arrow Rain. The idea being here that Nils will sit in the back line, he will charge up Arrow Rain, and then on his next turn, unleash it on the enemy and deal a ton of damage, hopefully destroying most of them, or finishing off things that were already weakened, or weakening other things so that the rest of the party can finish them off. He, along with Josephine, is probably the best put together character in the squad, and I have been very happy with what he's able to do. But he is also limited. If something happens where he's not able to get his Arrow Rain to pop off properly, he's just done. He pretty much has nothing else that he's able to do at that point, and that is rough to deal with. Finally, we have Quinn, our Featherbow. She is here as another support unit, things like Photon Arrow to reduce enemy physical defense, so that our Arrow Rain can really pop off. Saint Shot to tank enemies' passive points, Shining Light, so again, along with Dimitri, they're blinded. They can't wind up taking out Nils, so he has time to get his Arrow Rain off. And then Aerial Pursuit, so she can just deal some extra damage to the enemy. It all looks good on paper. The issue is that there are so many different things that can counter this squad that I wasn't really anticipating. Anything with high physical defense is pretty much going to stonewall everything that we're doing here. Anything that deals magic damage is going to be a big problem for us. Anything with any sort of true strike, if we're not able to blind them successfully, which is harder to do than you might think if there's a lot of enemies with True Strike, is going to tear apart 4 out of 5 members of this squad. The only one who's going to be able to handle it is Josephine, because she has okay physical defense. Everyone else, like our Angels, are just going to get destroyed because they're flying units. Nils and Dimitri both have very poor defenses. They're going to get torn apart immediately, even though Nils has good HP. And anything that has any sort of like major column or row attacks as well. Griffin Knights, terrifying. Wyvern Masters, horrifying. Great Knights? Nah, man, don't even think about it. We're not going to be able to take them down in time. I was really confident in this squad's capability to defend itself, and their primary role as a ranged support team does really work. If I really want them to be dealing extra damage, I can switch Nils to the squad leader since he's got the best physical attack, or even really Josephine, because she actually has even better physical attack looking at it. But I do like to have Quinn-Ons that they can navigate around more efficiently, switch it if I need to, and they do fulfill that role. They just weren't as good at defending themselves as I was hoping they would be. Ideally, I would probably swap out Dimitri and or Vivian to have either tankier units or something that would be able to maybe give a good attack buff to Nils that our arrow rain will hit way harder, or something that is also going to be able to deal more damage. Again, maybe a Griffin Master or a Great Knight of our own to be able to chip down some dangerous enemies and then let that Trapper's Warbow arrow rain finish them off. There's options here, but this particular unit did not perform the way that I would have liked to. And really, that brings me around to the point of this video. You can see how these units have potential once you know what you're looking at. Switch some gear around here and there, maybe take some stuff from some of my other squads, swap a class or two, maybe even change some growths around if a character doesn't have quite the stat set that you would like, different things like that, and it can make a world of difference. Even just getting their gear forged could make a big difference, but with the decisions that I made over the course of this campaign, the resources that I had available, these two squads wound up kind of in the doghouse, and it's a little bit of a shame, but it goes to show just how quickly a unit can fall apart if you're not careful about how you're putting them together. So, I ask you guys, put in the comments down below, how would you fix these squads? What would you change? What gear changes would you make? What optimizations to your conditions and your tactics? What classes would you switch around? Hell, where would you change positions in the squad itself? Let me know all of that so that people who are looking for help in maybe fixing the squads that they have and don't quite know how to get there, but are happy with the base idea, can draw some inspiration and maybe get those units up to fighting shape, because it can be done. It just can be a little bit hard to see how to do so. With that said, though, thank you all so much for watching. My name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other. Bye now.